I didn't know it then, but the night I stepped barefoot into our driveway and noticed a second phone in my husband's car quietly cracked my marriage open. There was no sound to warn me, no moment dramatic enough to stop time. Just one hidden object that would slowly follow me into every room of my life and explain everything I was about to lose. My name is Marissa Cole, and until very recently I believed my life was quiet in a good way. I am 31 years old, married for 7 years, and convinced that silence meant stability. I thought knowing someone meant understanding them completely. I thought peace looked like routine. My husband, Nathan Cole, 39, was admired by almost everyone who met him. Calm, reliable, respected at work, the kind of man people trusted without hesitation. Friends would smile at us and say how lucky I was, and I believed them. We lived in a modest house just outside Columbus, Ohio, surrounded by neat lawns and familiar streets where nothing ever seemed out of place. Our days followed the same rhythm without effort. Morning coffee, work, dinner, sleep, then the same again. If someone had asked me back then whether I was happy, I would have answered yes without thinking too hard. Not thrilled, not passionate, but safe, and at the time safe felt like enough. The night everything shifted did not announce itself. That is what still unsettles me. There were no arguments, no dramatic signs, no sense of danger. Nathan came home later than usual and blamed traffic as he often did. I kissed his cheek, stirred the pasta on the stove, and pressed play on a paused show. Ordinary moments stacked together, nothing suspicious. After dinner he fell asleep on the couch, his breathing slow and even, and I watched him longer than usual, feeling a distance I couldn't name. I told myself marriages go through quiet seasons. Around midnight I realized my phone charger was still in his car. I didn't want my phone to die overnight, so I stepped outside barefoot into the cool air, the porch light humming softly above me. I opened the passenger door and leaned in, and that was when I saw it. A phone resting in the center console, black case, screen facing down. Not mine. Not Nathan's usual phone either. I knew his phone the way you know something you see every day. This one felt wrong before I could explain why. I picked it up without thinking, surprised by its weight as the screen lit up beneath my fingers. No photo. No notifications. Just a simple digital clock glowing back at me. My heart didn't race in panic, but in confusion mixed with curiosity. I told myself it had to be a work phone, something temporary, something unimportant. Yet my hand trembled slightly as I turned it over. No name. No scratches. No signs of age. It looked new, intentional, hidden. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the silence of the neighborhood, every house dark, every window calm, while something inside me quietly shifted. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it. I didn't wake Nathan. I didn't accuse him. I didn't invent stories. I went back inside, plugged in my charger, and lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sleep never fully came that night. I didn't understand it yet, but that phone was not just an object. It was an opening. And once I noticed it, my life would never return to the way it had been before. The next morning felt heavier than it should have. I woke up before Nathan, my body tense in a way I could not explain, as if I had carried something through the night without realizing it. I moved quietly through the kitchen, making coffee, watching the sun rise through the window, trying to convince myself that what I saw in the car meant nothing. People have work phones. People forget things. People have reasons. Yet every ordinary thought sounded weak in my head. When Nathan finally woke up, he kissed my forehead like always, asked about breakfast, and spoke about his meetings for the day. His voice was steady. His face showed no cracks. That calm scared me more than anger ever could. While he showered, I watched his phone charging on the counter. It looked familiar. Comfortable. Honest. The second phone did not exist in this kitchen, yet I felt it everywhere. At work I could not focus. My eyes drifted to my own phone repeatedly, as if it might explain something without being asked. Around noon, I caught myself replaying the moment in the driveway again and again, noticing details I missed before. The way the phone was placed carefully, not tossed aside, the way my instinct told me it was hidden, not forgotten. That evening, Nathan said he needed to stop by the office again. His tone was casual. I said okay, matching his calm, but inside my chest something tightened. While he was gone, I stood in the living room listening to the house settle, realizing how quiet my life had become, how easily silence had replaced conversation. If this story is already touching something inside you, if it feels familiar in a way you did not expect, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. None of us are truly alone even when our questions have no answers yet. When Nathan returned, I watched him move through the house, noticing things I once ignored, the way he avoided leaving his phone unattended, the way his smile reached his mouth but not his eyes. That night after he fell asleep, I stayed awake, staring into the dark, feeling the slow burn of uncertainty settle into my bones. I realized then that trust does not break loudly. It erodes quietly, thought by thought, moment by moment. I told myself I would not jump to conclusions. I told myself I would observe. That decision felt mature. Reasonable. But deep down, a different truth was forming. Once doubt enters your life, it does not wait politely. It rearranges everything, even the parts you thought were solid. I did not touch the second phone again that night, but it followed me into my dreams, glowing softly, waiting, patient, as if it knew I would come back to it soon. Over the next few days, I became someone I barely recognized, not because I acted differently on the outside, but because my attention sharpened in a way it never had before. I noticed patterns. Nathan left the house earlier than usual and returned later, always with a reasonable explanation, always with the same even tone. He started taking phone calls outside, saying the signal was better there, and when he laughed during those calls, it sounded lighter than his laughter with me. I told myself I was imagining things, yet my body reacted before my mind could argue. My stomach tightened when he grabbed his keys. My shoulders stiffened when his phone buzzed. I was no longer living inside moments. I was analyzing them. One afternoon while he showered, I stood alone in our bedroom, staring at his dresser, feeling a pull toward the car keys hanging by the door. I hesitated for a long time. This was the line I never thought I would cross. I had always believed that trust meant not looking. That love meant giving space. But trust had already been damaged without my consent, and I was done pretending I felt safe. My hands shook as I walked to the driveway and opened the car again. The second phone was still there, exactly where I left it, as if it belonged in that space more than I did. This time I turned it on fully. It had no fingerprint lock, no face recognition, just a simple passcode screen. I did not try to guess it. Instead, I scrolled through what I could see without unlocking it. Missed call notifications appeared. Names hidden behind numbers. Messages previewed just enough to suggest intimacy without giving details. My chest tightened as I realized this device held a version of my husband I had never met. I placed the phone back carefully, my heart pounding, my mouth dry, feeling both guilty and justified at the same time. That night, Nathan sat beside me on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, his touch familiar yet distant. I wondered how long someone could live two lives without collapsing under the weight of it. I wondered how long I had been loving a man who no longer fully existed in front of me. Sleep became difficult. Food tasted flat. Conversations felt scripted. I smiled when expected. I nodded at the right moments. Inside, I felt like I was standing in a hallway with doors on both sides, each one holding a truth I was not ready to open. I did not confront him because I needed clarity, not excuses. I needed to know whether this was betrayal or something else entirely. More than anything, I needed to know whether the life I was protecting was already gone. And so I waited, watching closely, learning the quiet language of avoidance, understanding that some answers only reveal themselves when you stop asking questions out loud. The breaking point did not arrive with bravery or sudden clarity. It came quietly through exhaustion. One evening after Nathan had fallen asleep, I remained alone at the kitchen table, the house wrapped in a silence so heavy it felt like it pressed against my skin. Every day my chest felt tight, my thoughts looping endlessly, and I understood then that uncertainty was no longer something I could live with. Not knowing was hurting me more deeply than any truth ever could. I walked out to the driveway again, slower than before, my steps measured as if my body already knew this moment would change something permanent. The car door opened softly and the second phone sat exactly where it always had, waiting, unmoved, almost patient in a way that felt unsettling. I brought it inside and placed it on the table in front of me, the glow of the screen cutting through the dark room. I tried a passcode Nathan used years earlier, not because I expected success, but because my hands moved before my fear could stop them. When it unlocked, a cold sensation ran through me, sharp and immediate. What appeared on the screen was a life that existed entirely without me. Messages stretched back months, filled with warmth, humor, and emotional intimacy that tightened my throat as I read. He was not simply exchanging words, he was offering parts of himself I had not seen in a long time. Stories about his day, thoughts he no longer shared at home, jokes that felt familiar yet foreign. The contact name was simple, almost harmless, but everything beneath it carried a closeness that could not be denied. I could not read everything. My vision blurred, my breathing became uneven, and I forced myself to stop. Photos appeared as I scrolled, not graphic but personal enough to reveal shared moments, private smiles, a connection that had quietly grown while I remained unaware. What hurt most was not that another woman existed, but that my marriage had been hollowed out slowly without my knowledge or consent. I sat there for a long time, the phone resting on the table, my reflection faintly visible between messages, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. I felt anger, but it was layered with grief, confusion, and a profound sense of mourning for the life I believed I was living. Eventually, I placed the phone back exactly where I had found it, not because I was finished but because I needed air, space, a moment to steady myself. Later, lying beside Nathan with his back turned toward me, I understood something with painful clarity. Love does not vanish suddenly. It fades through small decisions, through secrecy, through attention given elsewhere. And once that truth settles in, there is no returning to the comfort of not knowing. After that night, something inside me hardened, not into anger but into clarity. I moved through my days with a strange calm, as if my emotions had stepped back to watch rather than react. Nathan noticed nothing, or maybe he chose not to. He talked about work, about plans, about small inconveniences, and I responded when expected, my voice steady, my face composed. Inside, I was cataloging every detail, every shift in tone, every habit that suddenly made sense. I realized how long I had been adjusting myself to his distance without questioning it, how often I had filled silence with patience instead of curiosity. I stopped asking how his day was, not out of spite but because I already knew the answer was incomplete. At night, I lay awake listening to him breathe, wondering how someone could share a bed while living somewhere else entirely. I thought about the woman behind those messages, about the version of Nathan she knew, the one who wrote thoughtfully, who seemed present, who noticed details. I wondered if he laughed differently with her, if he felt lighter, if he told her things he once told me. The house began to feel unfamiliar, like a place I was visiting rather than living in. I cleaned rooms that did not need cleaning, reorganized drawers that had not moved in years, trying to regain control over something tangible. Friends called, and I let their calls go unanswered. I did not want advice. I did not want pity. I needed to hear my own thoughts clearly before inviting others into them. One afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She looked composed, but her eyes carried a quiet alertness, like someone waiting for the next sound in the dark. I realized then that I was no longer afraid of what I might discover. I was afraid of how long I had accepted less than honesty. That understanding shifted something fundamental in me. I began preparing for a conversation I had not yet decided to have, rehearsing words silently, testing truths against my own reflection. I was not planning a confrontation fueled by rage. I wanted answers, and more importantly, I wanted to know who I was without the version of my marriage I had been protecting. The longer I waited, the clearer it became that whatever happened next would change everything, not because of what Nathan had done, but because I was no longer willing to disappear inside someone else's secrets. The moment arrived quietly, without warning, on a calm Sunday afternoon when the sunlight coming through the windows felt almost invasive, as if it was exposing things I had worked hard not to see. Nathan was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through his phone with an ease that made my chest tighten, his posture relaxed, unaware of the weight building inside me. I understood then that if I waited for the right time, it would never appear, because fear always finds reasons to delay truth. I sat down across from him, folding my hands together to keep them steady, surprised by the calm that settled over me, a calm born not from certainty but from exhaustion. I did not accuse him or raise my voice. I asked a simple question, one I had repeated in my head so many times it felt memorized, asking if there was anything he needed to tell me. He looked up slowly, confusion crossing his face for just a brief second before it vanished, replaced by a practiced smile. He said no. That single word shifted the air between us, heavy and final. I told him I knew about the second phone. The color left his face gradually, as if his body needed time to catch up with what his mind already understood. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then let out a long breath, rubbing his hand through his hair like someone searching for an exit that no longer existed. He said it was complicated. He said it began as conversations, innocent at first, something that made him feel heard in ways he hadn't realized he was missing. I listened without interrupting, aware of how carefully he shaped his explanations, how he avoided details, how he spoke as if things had happened to him rather than because of him. When he finally said her name, it sounded softer than I expected, almost delicate, yet it carried the full weight of months of hidden choices. He told me he never intended to hurt me. He said he still loved me. I asked him how love could survive alongside secrecy, how trust could exist where truth had been withheld. He had no answer. Silence settled into the room, thick and unmoving, and in that stillness I understood something clearly. I was no longer speaking to the man I married, but to someone who had slowly reshaped himself in a life that no longer included me fully. I told him I needed time not as punishment but as protection, space to hear my own thoughts without his explanations filling the gaps. That night I slept in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, feeling an unexpected sense of grounding despite the ache in my chest. The confrontation did not bring comfort, but it brought clarity, and once truth is spoken aloud, it cannot be returned to silence. I knew then that whatever came next would require me to choose myself in ways I never had before. After the conversation, the house felt suspended in time, as if every object was waiting to see what I would do next. Nathan moved carefully around me, quieter than usual, watching my reactions the way someone watches thin ice. I noticed how unfamiliar that felt. For years I had been the one adjusting, smoothing edges, making space. Now the balance had shifted and he did not know how to stand in it. I spent long hours alone, not crying, not collapsing, but thinking deeply in a way I never had before. I was not focused on her. I was not even focused on him. I was focused on myself, on the woman who had slowly learned to live with absence and call it stability. That realization unsettled me more than betrayal ever could. A few days later I asked Nathan to sit with me again. Not for another confession, not for reassurance, but for honesty without protection. I told him I did not want apologies or promises. I wanted clarity. I asked him when he stopped choosing me. The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes shifting as if searching for a version of the truth that would hurt less. He said it happened gradually, that nothing felt dramatic at the time, that he did not wake up one day and decide to replace me. I listened carefully, noticing how often he described his choices as accidents rather than intentions. Then I asked something he clearly did not expect. I asked him if he would still be here if I had never found that phone. He did not answer right away. The silence stretched between us, heavy and revealing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. He said he did not know. That uncertainty landed harder than any confession before it. In that moment, I understood that my presence in his life had become optional, something he kept because it was familiar, not because it was chosen daily. That night, I packed a small bag and told him I was going to stay with my sister for a while. Not to create distance as a threat, but to create space for myself. He did not argue. He did not beg. He nodded slowly as if he had expected this outcome long before I said it out loud. The drive to my sister's house felt strangely calm. I watched the road stretch ahead of me, realizing how long it had been since I made a decision without considering how it might inconvenience someone else. At her place, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Not because the pain was gone, but because my body finally felt safe enough to rest. Over the following days, I began to see my marriage from the outside. I replayed moments I once dismissed, conversations that ended too quickly, laughter that faded too soon. I saw how often I had filled gaps with effort while Nathan filled his with someone else. That awareness did not make me bitter. It made me honest. When Nathan called, I answered, but I no longer rushed to soothe his discomfort. I spoke calmly, clearly, refusing to soften truths to make them easier to hear. I told him I was not interested in competing for attention. I told him I would not rebuild something alone. He listened, truly listened this time, but listening is not the same as choosing. One afternoon, while sitting by the window, I realized something that surprised me. I was not afraid of losing my marriage anymore. I was afraid of returning to it unchanged. That distinction mattered. It meant my decision was no longer about him fixing what he broke, but about whether this relationship could ever hold the version of me that had finally woken up. I understood then that the hardest part was not walking away or staying. It was accepting that love without presence is just a memory, and memories cannot build a future. Whatever came next would demand courage, not endurance, and I was finally ready to find out which one I had been practicing all along. Living away from Nathan changed my sense of time. Days felt longer, fuller, as if my mind finally had space to stretch. I stayed with my sister, but I spent most hours alone, walking through quiet streets, sitting in cafes with my notebook, listening to conversations that had nothing to do with me. For the first time in years, my thoughts were not interrupted by the need to explain myself to anyone. I began writing, not letters to Nathan, not messages I planned to send, but simple observations about who I was becoming. I noticed how my shoulders relaxed when I did not anticipate disappointment. I noticed how easily I laughed when no one was managing my reactions. That scared me because it meant I had been carrying more weight than I admitted. Nathan continued calling, sometimes carefully, sometimes desperately. He talked about therapy, about cutting contact, about rebuilding trust. I listened, but I did not promise anything. I asked questions instead. I asked how he planned to change patterns, not feelings. I asked what accountability looked like to him when no one was watching. His answers were thoughtful, but something was missing. They sounded learned, not lived. I realized that remorse can exist without transformation, and that understanding shifted how I heard every word he spoke. One afternoon, I agreed to meet him in a public park. I wanted neutral ground, a place where emotions could not take over the space. We sat on opposite sides of a bench, watching families pass by, children laughing, couples holding hands. Nathan looked older to me, not physically but emotionally, like someone who had just discovered consequences late in life. He asked me what I wanted. The question felt heavy but also freeing. I told him the truth. I wanted peace. I wanted honesty without monitoring. I wanted a relationship where I did not have to check my instincts. He nodded, but I could tell he was measuring my words against the hope of reconciliation. I did not offer clarity because I did not have it yet. After that meeting, I stopped thinking in terms of saving or ending my marriage. I started thinking in terms of alignment. Did my life with Nathan align with the person I was becoming? Did staying require shrinking? Did leaving require bravery I was ready to practice? These questions followed me quietly, not demanding answers, just attention. I began imagining a future that did not revolve around repairing something broken, but building something honest, whether alone or with someone capable of meeting me fully. At night, I lay awake not replaying messages or conversations, but visualizing choices. I imagined waking up without suspicion. I imagined trusting silence again. I imagined introducing myself without defining myself through compromise. These thoughts did not feel rebellious. They felt natural. That realization told me more than any confession ever could. By the end of that week, I knew I was approaching a decision. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because clarity was replacing confusion. I understood that whatever I chose next would shape not just my marriage, but my relationship with myself. And this time I was not willing to negotiate that away. The decision did not arrive as a sudden realization. It formed slowly, quietly, the way understanding settles when you finally stop arguing with yourself. One morning, while making coffee in my sister's kitchen, I noticed how steady my hands felt. There was no rush in my movements, no tightness in my chest. That calm told me something important. I was no longer waiting for Nathan to convince me of anything. I was listening inward instead. I realized that for weeks, my focus had shifted from his behavior to my boundaries, and that shift changed everything. I asked Nathan to meet again, this time at my sister's dining table. I wanted a familiar space, but one that was no longer ours. When he arrived, he looked hopeful, nervous, prepared. I saw effort in him, real effort, and I acknowledged it. I told him I believed he was sorry. I told him I believed he was trying. But belief was no longer enough. I explained that trust, once fractured this deeply, does not return simply because both people want it to. It returns when safety becomes consistent again, and I no longer felt safe inside the version of our marriage we had built. He asked if that meant I was done. The question hung between us, heavy with fear. I told him the truth as gently as I could. I said I was done trying to carry us alone. I said I could not rebuild something that required me to silence my instincts. I said choosing myself did not mean I stopped caring about him, it meant I finally started caring about me. Tears filled his eyes, but I did not feel pulled back by them. Compassion stayed. Obligation did not. After that conversation, I returned to our house one last time, not to stay but to collect what was mine. Walking through those rooms felt surreal. The walls held memories, but they no longer defined me. I packed clothes, books, small objects that mattered quietly. I did not touch shared photographs. They belonged to a chapter that had ended without ceremony. When I left, I did not look back, not out of anger but out of respect for the future I was stepping into. In the weeks that followed, my life simplified. I found a small apartment, light-filled and quiet. I created routines that felt like care instead of survival. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from. I laughed more easily. I slept deeply. Healing did not feel dramatic. It felt steady. I learned that closure does not always come from understanding every detail. Sometimes it comes from deciding you do not need to. Occasionally I thought about Nathan. I hoped he would grow. I hoped he would learn to be present wherever he stood. But those hopes no longer dictated my path. I had crossed into a different kind of adulthood, one where love is not measured by endurance but by mutual presence. I understood then that the second phone was never the real betrayal. The real loss was how long I had abandoned my own voice. Finding it again did not feel like winning or losing. It felt like returning home to myself. The months after I left did not turn me into a new person overnight. I did not wake up fearless or completely healed. What changed was quieter than that. I stopped questioning my reality. I stopped asking myself if I was asking for too much. I began trusting the signals my body had been sending me for years. The tension, the fatigue, the sadness I kept explaining away. Living alone gave those signals space to speak clearly, and for the first time I listened without arguing back. My life became smaller in a good way. Fewer explanations. Fewer compromises that left me empty. I built routines that belonged only to me. Morning walks without rushing. Evenings with books instead of screens. Conversations that did not feel like negotiations. Some days were lonely, yes, but loneliness felt honest compared to the quiet isolation I lived with before. I learned that being alone and feeling alone are not the same thing. Nathan and I spoke occasionally. Our conversations were respectful, measured, distant. He told me he was still working on himself. I believed him and I wished him well. There was no hatred left in me. Anger burns out when it is no longer fed. What remained was understanding. We did not fail because love disappeared. We failed because presence did. That difference mattered to me. It helped me let go without bitterness. One evening, while unpacking the last box in my apartment, I found a note I had written weeks earlier, back when everything felt uncertain. It said, "Choose the life where you do not have to betray yourself to belong." Reading it, I felt a deep sense of alignment. I had done exactly that. Not perfectly. Not without pain. But honestly. I thought about how many people live with quiet doubts, convincing themselves that discomfort is normal, that silence means peace, that loyalty requires self-erasure. I thought about how easy it is to ignore the small warnings because nothing looks broken from the outside. My story is not unique, and that is exactly why it matters. These moments happen in ordinary houses, in familiar routines, in lives that appear stable. They happen quietly until someone decides to pay attention. If this story connected with you, if any part of it felt uncomfortably familiar or gently reassuring, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments where you are watching from. Your voice matters here. None of us move through moments like these completely alone, even when it feels that way. What I know now is simple, but it took me years to learn. Love without honesty is not safety. Commitment without presence is not partnership. And choosing yourself is not selfish when the alternative is disappearing. You are allowed to ask for clarity. You are allowed to leave spaces where your intuition is constantly questioned. You are allowed to build a life that feels calm on the inside, not just acceptable on the outside. I did not lose everything when I walked away. I gained myself back. And that has made all the difference.